So welcome back, everyone, to session 4 of Harnessing the Science of Learning. Let's get started. We will begin with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that ONLit's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. So hello, everyone. Welcome to ONLit's Harnessing the Science of Learning book study. I am so excited that you'll be joining us tonight as we move into the second half of our book study. Let's bring joy to our students by harnessing the science of learning together. So I'm Laura Bross. I'm a grade 2-3 classroom educator in the Avon-Maitland District School Board. I'm also a member of the curriculum assistance team here at ONLit. You can find me on Instagram and X at Miss Bross Learn. And if you want to email me with any of your questions or comments, my email address is laura@onlit.org. So let's take another little quick look at our schedule. So far, we have heard from Dr. Nathanial Swain via recording, introducing the book and digging into cognitive load theory. Then we heard from Dr. Zach Rochelle. Dr. Rochelle explained some key concepts about how learning happens, including cognitive load theory, types of knowledge, novice versus experts, the forgetting curve, and retrieval practice. Next, we were joined by Dr. Jamie Peevler. Dr. Peevler linked cognitive load theory into effective literacy instruction and discussed an MTSS framework to meet the needs of all students across all tiers. Tonight, we will shift our focus to math, where we'll be joined by the knowledgeable Dr. Robin Codding. Dr. Codding is a professor of applied psychology at Northeastern University, associate editor of academic journals, and co-author of the book Effective Math Interventions, a guide to improving whole number knowledge. Right here. Her research interests focus on intervention and implementation, factors that contribute to student responsiveness of those interventions, and strategies to support intervention implementation. Tonight, she will share her expertise on conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, worked examples, retrieval practice, fluency, and math anxiety. So just like previous sessions, we will spend most of our time with our Informed Insights guest. Afterwards, I'll share a few more resources that have been added to our Evidence-Informed Educator series, and then we will wrap up with our next steps. Now let's get to it and start our learning with our Informed Insights guest. I have listened to Dr. Codding many times on podcasts and webinars, so I can't wait to learn from her live tonight. Welcome, Dr. Robin Codding. Just give us a minute to pass the screen over so we can get started.
All right.
We're good. We can see your slides.
Okay, very good. Yay. Well, thank you so much for having me. As you pointed out, these are the 5 big areas that I'm going to briefly touch on. They're big topic areas, but they are related to chapters 8 and 9 in the text that you're reading. And of course, we could spend more than 50 minutes on each of these topics. But what I hope to do is actually talk about each of these topic areas by anchoring our conversation on 6 misconceptions about six misconceptions. One of the things I really appreciate about this book and I've really enjoyed is the on-track, off-track indicators that are associated with each chapter. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to present the 6 misconceptions, and I want to know by you dropping in the chat which of these misconceptions are operating most often in your experiences. So I will begin with teach conceptual knowledge first. So go ahead and drop in the chat if this is one of those that you can even write number 1 that you experience in your educational situation. The next one is productive struggle leads to deeper learning. Explicit instruction is only helpful for some students. Standard algorithms are harmful. Fact fluency doesn't matter. And timed tests and or tasks cause math anxiety. So if you go ahead and drop in the chat, I'll get a good sense of where all of you are coming from in terms of the misconceptions that you are facing most often. So I'm seeing fives, sixes. I see one person that has most of these on here, the middle four. Definitely 5 and 6, lots of 5s and 6s, 1 and 2 and 6. Many of these things all the time. Some of you have written all of them. Oh, we've got a lot of all of them. Amazing. Okay. So that's good to know. So what I tried to do is, again, anchor each of those 5 big topic areas that we just discussed around these misconceptions, and I'm going to present them in the order that you see here. A lot of you wrote all as well. Awesome. Well, I'm so happy to be able to have this conversation with you then. We're going to start with the first misconception, which is teach conceptual understanding first. Believe it or not, in the schools that I have been in, sometimes that has been referred to as teach conceptual understanding only, which sometimes boggles my mind. One of the things that comes about when we talk about conceptual and procedural is what exactly are we talking about? So maybe some of this conversation or confusion is related to what these terms mean and how we're using and referring to these terms. I'm going to be using definitions from the National Research Council. That was published in 2001. Kilpatrick was one of the main authors. So the definition that they use in that conversation is comprehension of mathematical concepts, laws, principles, and relations. So we are talking about things like estimating the closest whole number of 12/13 and 7/8. So understanding and estimating magnitude, evaluating examples of concepts like is 3 the same as 3, placing 28 on a number line, so translating quantities between different representational systems, quantity discrimination, knowing which is bigger and by how much, and then defining different terms, such as generating or selecting definitions for the equal sign. We might also think about the commutative property, place value according to the base 10 system, and the ability to compose or decompose whole numbers. When it comes to procedural, I'm also going to use the National Research Council definition. It is also the case that Riddle, Johnson, and colleagues have referred to procedural in a very similar way. It is knowledge of when and how to use steps or actions appropriately and perform them flexibly, accurately, and efficiently. So it's things like solving problems such as 8/10 plus 6/10 in a familiar format, then solving problems with a new surface or problem feature like 2.5 plus 1/4, quick and effortless recall of basic facts like 5 plus 4, and then of course, at the bottom, you can see a more complex computation problem. So solving those using algorithms, mental math, and other strategies as appropriate, and remembering that the key here is really as appropriate. So one of the things that's been really interesting is that an initial report that I'm telling you all of these definitions from the National Research Council says that pitting procedural fluency against conceptual understanding really creates a false dichotomy. We don't want to do that. And what I think is particularly interesting is that on the bottom, you're seeing a quotation from the National Mathematics Advisory Panel report, which is another panel of interdisciplinary experts that published the existing work in an effort to emphasize what's important in K-8 instruction in 2008. And likewise, they stated conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, including quick and effortless recall of facts, in case you haven't heard enough already about how important facts are. These conceptual understanding and procedural fluency are mutually beneficial. So again, we're having a common theme here. We also can notice if we look at this rope, so this is sometimes considered the rope of math, the math rope. It is a math proficiency rope that was generated by the National Research Council. You can see that all of these 5 components are intertwined and actually braided together. And that includes conceptual understanding, procedural fluency. So it's an illustration that these are 2 mutually beneficial components. So really, when we think about it, conceptual knowledge can help with constructing, selecting, and appropriately executing problem-solving procedures, and practice implementing procedures may help students develop and deepen their understanding of concepts, especially if the practice is designed to make underlying concepts more apparent. Ultimately, everybody is interested in this notion of flexibility. And in reality, flexibility does not come unless we are integrating conceptual knowledge and procedural fluency. So, for example, if you know that addition is commutative, learning basic addition combinations is cut in half. You can solve novel problems if using basic rules of doubles plus the number line. So, understanding relationships among numbers. You can illustrate multiplicative understanding and estimation. So, for example, here the problem is not the solution. It's actually where the decimal is located. So, if you are able to use understanding, multiplicative understanding and estimation, you would know what the challenge is here and be able to locate the error. And then finally, understanding base 10 value, of course, we can look at these numbers in a different way. So we can solve them more easily. We can make 199 200 and 67 becomes 66, and that's an easier problem to solve. Likewise, we can break down 4 plus 26 into tens and ones and solve that problem more quickly. So again, if we integrate concepts and procedures, we're going to get what we ultimately desire, which is flexibility. So you might be wondering why this conversation keeps happening. Well, one of the things that we know is that there are actually 4 theories regarding the relationship between conceptual understanding and procedural knowledge. There's a concepts first theory, which is the one that we've been talking about. Conceptual basis is necessary to execute procedures. There's also a procedures first theory that procedures are learned via modeling and concepts are extrapolated. There's an iterative theory that the learning of one improves the other, and a simultaneous theory that concepts and procedures are inextricably linked and then develop synchronously. So, what we know based on the literature that exists so far is that most studies have demonstrated a bidirectional relationship between concepts and procedures, supporting the iterative approach between concepts and procedures. Specifically, there is evidence about this interactive relationship between conceptual understanding and procedural fluency across primary and secondary levels, predominantly primary and middle schools, in the areas of counting, decimals, addition and subtraction, equivalence, and fractions. So, in other words, this evidence for this relationship is being repeated across different age groups and with different specific topic areas within mathematics. So that brings us to number 2. So, to me, when I was thinking about how to organize our conversation today, I really thought that this notion of productive struggle leads to deeper learning really stems from some of the conversations that happened in chapter 9 and seems to follow this idea of conceptual first conversation. So, your book pointed out that sometimes leading with conceptual understanding means that teachers will ask students to discover or generate their strategies for a problem. And sometimes this is referred to as productive struggle. Productive struggle, though, does not deepen understanding, grit, or creative problem solving. Productive struggle can lead to frustration and cause students to develop misconceptions, which to me is particularly problematic. One of the things I see the most, what I refer to often as instructional casualties, is misconceptions that students have learned as a result of participating in core instruction in the classroom. In addition, the false starts involved in struggling with challenging tasks without adequate support or guidance, scaffolding, leads to lost instructional time and ultimately inefficiency in learning. So we literally do not throw a kid or a child in the deep end when they are learning to swim. And so we don't want to be doing that either when we're talking about math. Instead, students learning new skills need clear demonstration, modeling, and guided practice. So that should sound familiar. Students' comprehension of new information is improved by activating prior knowledge. And there's no evidence that giving partial information for making connections leads to learning. So let's emphasize for a moment this notion of prior knowledge. This is essential for educators to understand to facilitate learning. And it's true regardless of subject area. Prior knowledge is one of those most important things that students can use to hang on to and connect new information to. The other thing that I would like to bring back up is the instructional hierarchy. And I had the opportunity to listen to your guest who was speaking about reading in these chapters that you were referring to before. And they were talking about instructional hierarchy, which made me so excited and happy. So I'm going to talk back about the instructional hierarchy. So your book asks the rhetorical question, where does inquiry or discovery information fit? So that was really chapter 9. And to me, the answer could be provided with this notion of the instructional hierarchy. If we are providing effective explicit instruction for learning, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and building proficiency, which we'll also talk about with new math content first, when we do those things, after verifying that students are accurate and fluent and their performance is maintained over time and across related tasks, teachers can provide practice opportunities for productive struggle in which students are working to generalize their learning to a novel or challenging problem or task. So really, we're moving the struggle from the beginning or the opening to the end of the instructional sequence. And so what you're seeing here on this screen is this 4-step notion of the instructional hierarchy, also sometimes referred to as the learning hierarchy from Herring and colleagues. My colleague Matt Burns and I also talked about this in the context of math in a paper in 2010. Really, it means acquisition is establishing skills or concepts, so building accuracy. Fluency is remembering or retaining that skill, so building efficiency and accuracy. We also refer to that as automaticity, and that's what's described in your book and also by your previous guests. Generalization is enduring. So skills and concepts are demonstrated across academic tasks and situations. They persist. And then application or applying skills and concepts are integrated into novel problems. And so it's really in this latter stage where you can build upon or add potentially this notion of inquiry or discovery. All right. The third thing naturally that comes after having this conversation about productive struggle and conceptual understanding, and you heard a little bit of a segue to this, is explicit instruction. So many of you had described that you have also heard that explicit instruction is only helpful for some students or is not commonly used in the classrooms or educational settings that you are in. So explicit instruction is one of, if not the most important tool in an educator's tool belt. I included this infographic, which I pulled from social media because it reinforces the description of explicit instruction in your book. Explicit instruction is quite interactive. Despite popular belief, Zach Rochelle actually talked about it in his session with you. We talked about whiteboards and pair shares and pick a stick and corresponding. So this approach is really effective. It has so many different components that, number one, builds upon prior knowledge, but also uses simple, brief, and concise language, which reduces language demands, activates prior knowledge to enhance long-term memory accessibility, scaffolds instructional support so that associations can happen with students and we don't see a lot of overload, which you've also been talking about. Provides frequent review and practice. So it really embeds review and practice as part of this instructional approach, which again enhances the possibility that we're going to build fluency and generalization, allows sufficient time to rehearse and practice new information, includes visual aids, which there's some cautionary tales that your chapter 8 brought up about visual aids, which is important, but having those when they're needed, and then provide specific feedback to catch misconceptions. So one of the things that I think is really important is that underlying working memory deficits and reduction of language load are important for many students that struggle academically. And this is one of the best ways to address those difficulties. So we know that less language load lowers impact on working memory because explicit instruction is unambiguous and uses careful sequencing of skill building activities. So it really gives you a lot of bang for your buck. I really like the Oxford Dictionary definition stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. And what I think is particularly important about explicit instruction is that this is the avenue for which all of the students in your classroom can access core instruction. Everyone can participate. So, in the science of learning realm, very consistent with what your book has been describing, the book talks about learning and working memory and working memory load. So we know that novice learners have limited prior knowledge. They remember and process information in parts. They tend to use inefficient problem-solving tactics, and they may work backwards. We also know that working memory is limited in duration and capacity, right? It operates over a few seconds. It's just this temporary storage. It's about manipulating information at a specific time and focusing your attention in that way. So very much like Zach Rochelle pointed out in your book highlights, explicit instruction optimizes intrinsic load and minimizes extrinsic load. So ultimately, explicit instruction is better for novices and students that have or are at risk for specific learning disabilities in math. Ultimately, the conversation is really that novice learners are anyone in K to 12 instruction. And explicit instruction works with the working memory constraints to facilitate efficient and effective learning. On the other hand, discovery instruction is better for experts. There's less empirical support that it's effective for students in K to 12, and it tends to challenge working memory and hamper learning. So again, thinking about the load that you guys have been talking about, that cognitive load piece. Where is the evidence? Well, there's a ton of evidence. There is 4 different meta-analyses on math instruction with different populations of students that also include students with or at risk for math difficulties, and all of them are demonstrating that this is the most effective tool that we have available to us for facilitating math performance. So what you see on the graph is 3 of these meta-analyses. I put a arrow to where the moderate effect size would be, and you can see that all of the bars are above that. And I actually did not draw an arrow for the large effect size, which is around 0.80. So all of these effect sizes range between moderate and large. So it suggests that there's a lot of evidence, and there's a lot of evidence that the effect is very strong. I like this quote from Kronsberg and Van Leeuwen from 2003. Students with math difficulties and disabilities benefit more from explicit instruction than discovery-oriented methods. And again, highlighting that this is the avenue through which all students can access core instruction in your room. One of the references that was provided in your textbook was this one from the What Works Clearinghouse, Assisting Students Struggling with Mathematics, Intervention in the Elementary Grades. The reason it says elementary grades is ultimately because that's where more of the evidence is, and that was what was accumulated to build this record. But what I would suggest is that most of these things are good for all students, particularly those that are having a difficult time learning at that secondary level. The most important thing, though, is that the number 1 recommendation here is systematic explicit instruction. So, and again, illustrating that strong evidence that we just talked about. So incorporating explicit instruction into core instruction, using a curriculum that incorporates explicit instruction, and then providing explicit instruction during your intervention supports for the students that need a little bit more. By doing that, all kids are going to benefit and be ready to learn more advanced math. Okay. So this brings us to our 4th misconception. Teaching the standard algorithm is harmful. I know a lot of you had written that this is part of the series of middle things that you're often facing or hearing a lot about. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this as well. The truth about algorithms: many tasks in everyday life require algorithms. Algorithms link conceptual understanding and procedural knowledge. They permit understanding that mathematics is structured, it's predictable, it's organized, and it contains patterns. It is a tool for completing routine tasks and a mechanism for breaking down more complex problems into simpler subtasks. So I think really one of the most important components here is that link between conceptual understanding and procedural knowledge that is built through the algorithm, and that math has patterns and is predictable. We want students to feel good about math, and we want them to understand that it's structured, predictable, organized, and has patterns. And I think that can be lost sometimes when we start with concepts and we don't fold in procedures, or when we start with a productive struggle type task. By the time of the Adding It Up report, which is that report that I've been referring to, that National Research Council report in 2001, the research was really clear that avoiding algorithm-only instruction was and continues to be distinct from not teaching the standard algorithm at all. So I want all of you go ahead and solve this problem as fast as you can, and then go ahead and pop in the chat how you solve that problem. What is the approach that you used or the strategy? So I'll give you a couple seconds here. So someone's putting the answer in the chat. Don't tell me the answer. Yeah, exactly. You got it. You want to tell me how you solved that problem. Perfect. So I see 54 plus 50 minus 2, 50 plus 40, and 8 plus 4, added 10s, added 10s first, then 1s, had to regroup. Standard algorithm with regrouping. Adding the 1s, regrouping, and then adding the 10s, making it 50 plus 52. Awesome. So regrouping the 1s. Great. Standard algorithm with regrouping, compensation. Perfect. So what you probably did, right, is use your most efficient strategy, the one that came most automatic to you. And as I look in the chat, and as I pointed out to all of you, you're using a variety of different strategies. All of them are working, and all of them are most efficient for you. And I think this is one of the things that we don't want to get lost in the sauce as we're talking about algorithms. We want students to be able to identify the most efficient strategy. There are some strategies that are more efficient than others, particularly as you are learning skills. But this was a great demonstration that all of you were able to identify quickly that problem solution and had a variety of strategies in which you used to solve it. So if we look at the logic of the standard algorithm, so this is the standard algorithm. Many of you use that approach with regrouping. So of course, adding digits in the ones column. If the sum in the ones is greater than 10, we're going to regroup and then sum in the digits. Sum the digits in the tens column. And then you can see on the right-hand side here, I have, one approach to composing and decomposing these numerals into tens and ones. And what's interesting is that the worked problem on the right is why the algorithm on the left is working. So algorithms work because of mathematical laws. They can be proofed and they can be unpacked. And that's what we want students to understand, that they can use different strategies and they can get to the same answer. So I'm borrowing here from Amanda Vanderheyden, who she is the producer of Spring Math, or the developer of Spring Math. And she has shared some of these place value understanding algorithms with me, which I think are really interesting and demonstrate that point. So in this case, obviously, you are decomposing the numbers into hundreds, tens, and ones. Then you're starting with adding the ones, then adding the tens, and then adding the 100s. But you're also illustrating the same problem in this way, right? 420 minus 1 plus 140, and then solving the problem. So we're adding first and then subtracting to get 559. So using all of these approaches is illustrating why the standard algorithm works, that you can solve these problems in different ways and get the same answer. So looking at them at the same time can be particularly helpful. So I really loved the example algorithms that were described in chapter 8. I think they're excellent. And I love the progression of those algorithms, which some of them included visuals like 10 frames, capitalizing on that concrete pictorial abstract approach, but using predominantly that pictorial abstract approach. So I thought that was really terrific. I've built similar scripts myself. So this is excellent. You can see I liked it so much. I wanted to put one of the pages in your text on our slides for the part of our conversation. So this is the Think Aloud script that was provided. I think this is excellent. One of the things that happens with inquiry learning or concept emphasized learning is math talk, right? We hear a lot about math talk. I'm sure you've heard a lot about math talk. Ooh, I see there's a question in the chat. I'll get to you.
Yeah, I was just gonna, but if you see it, then you're good.
Yeah, all right. Okay, I'll pause my conversation about math talk for 1 second. Should the standard algorithm be taught first and then other strategies? So this is like the $1 million question, right? So one of the things that we don't know is whether or not this would be a good study if the standard algorithm taught first has a benefit, or if other strategies taught first have a benefit. So empirically, I'm not aware that we have that information. One of the things that we do know, though, is that if a student is leaving primary school and going into middle school without understanding the standard algorithm, they are going to be in trouble. So the standard algorithm has to be part of that conversation. Does it need to be first? I think that's something that you can make that determination about. What I really like about where Amanda Vanderheyden goes with her algorithms is that the point of them, once they understand that there are different types of ways to solve the problem, is that they line them up together so that you can see, oh, I can solve the same problem using the standard algorithm and these other methods, and I'm getting the same answer. And to me, that's that linking piece that maybe we're not doing that's confusing students. Because when we present too many opportunities or too many ways for them to solve the problem, and we don't make the connection between them, I think that can become more confusing for students. So we need the standard algorithm. The extent to which we need the other ones, I think that's, to me, that's the question. So great question. Okay, so I'll go back to my math talk notion. So I'm sure many of you have heard about math talk. To me, math talk is great, and it's all about think alouds. So I was so excited in chapter 8 to read about think alouds. Think alouds are scripted and modeled by teachers, and then students can engage in those with one another with feedback from teachers. It turns out that if you are a child that struggles to learn math, without accurate modeling of a think aloud procedure, you're going to struggle to actually engage in this process. And that's one of the reasons I love Think Aloud. So as I mentioned, I love the Think Aloud descriptions in this book. Think Alouds are often described as eavesdropping on someone's thinking by verbalizing the inner speech or the silent dialogue as they think their way through a problem. Teachers are modeling how expert thinkers solve problems. And that is so beneficial to all of the students that you're working with. So accurate expert modeling of thinking is necessary for students to benefit. Once they've observed that accurate expert modeling of the think aloud, and perhaps you give them a checklist that illustrates that what's in that think aloud, they can then repeat that think aloud with their peers. And I think that's a really powerful conversation to have. It is a guided task, and it is also a task that students can feel successful with. So, is there another question?
There is a comment in the chat. I wonder if somehow you will connect it with the instructional hierarchy a bit, but
oh, sure.
If you want to comment on that.
Yep. So the question is, primary students don't always understand the standard algorithm until they've made sense of numbers in inquiry. So I'm not totally sure what you're meaning by numbers in inquiry. That might be specific to sort of the context that you are having that your textbook or educational situation is in. But when we think about the standard algorithm and introducing the standard algorithm, sorry about that, we of course want to first make sure that students have all those prerequisite skills. And if we think about using the standard algorithm, we're using it for complex computation. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. That's a later, more complex skill. So students need to already have some things in place. They need to understand base 10. They need to be fluent with basic facts. And so if those two pieces are in place, you should be able to present any kind of algorithm to them, including the standard algorithm. Again, when you're presenting that standard algorithm, I think what Laura is asking about is you're going to start by providing modeling guided instruction and a we do, you do, sorry, I do, we do, you do format. So you're going to model and demonstrate. Then you might do a problem together. You might look at a worked example, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes as well. And then you might have the student actually work together in a partial example, which I really love the idea of. So you start with a worked example, and then the students get an opportunity to do a partially worked example before they ever are doing an independent example on their own. So hopefully that makes sense about how we make it so that students can actually engage with that standard algorithm.
Yeah, I think how you referenced like needing those prerequisite skills.
Okay.
And if they are still in that acquisition stage, then we need to be doing that explicit instruction piece first.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. So all those prerequisite skills, yeah, you can't give the student the complex algorithm and the complex computation problem without first understanding those basic facts, for sure. So that was a great question, because you're foreshadowing the rest of the conversation that we're gonna have here. So I love that. Okay. So very appropriately, that leads us right into this worked example. So again, I'm going to have you write in the chat the answer that you think is to this question. So which approach, asking for solutions to all 8 problems or interleaving 4 worked problems with 4 unworked problems, will lead to better learning? So this is an unworked problem. And then this is actually the same problem, of course, but worked. So go ahead and write in the chat which approach you think leads to better learning. Asking for solutions to all 8 problems or interleaving 4 worked with 4 unworked problems. All right, kind of led you to that answer, and you've already had that good background based on your textbook to say interleaving. Yes, it is interleaving. But we often don't do interleaving in this way, and I think this is yeah. So someone where interleaving kind of like I do, you do, I do, you do, I do, you do. Exactly, and I love that description. I think that's terrific. Here's what we know. So again, What Works Clearinghouse has these great practice guides. This is another one. It doesn't come specifically from math. It's more on learning in general. Research has shown that students typically learn more deeply and more easily when examples are interleaved between problems. You can see it's the number 2 recommendation from this practice guide, and it has that moderate evidence, which I think is terrific. So we know that blocked practice is necessary for new skills and concepts. I think your prior guests had talked about that. And that students must see solutions and correct their errors. That's part of their learning process, particularly in that acquisition stage. Interleaving is really useful for promoting cumulative review. And I know Zach Rochelle talked about cumulative review with you as well. And that's where we can see that interleaving becomes particularly beneficial. One of the things that I mentioned, but I didn't show an illustration of, I'm just going to back up for a second, is I really like this notion of partially worked problems. So you're showing first a fully worked problem, and then you have a partially worked problem, and then you have an unworked problem. And I think that can be really helpful, again, for students who are building those skills. So again, it's providing another scaffold. So along with the work problems, I know Laura and I talked about this notion of math language. And I think this is a really big shift. At least for me, it seems like a really big shift in how we intentionally focus on math language when we're engaging in that explicit instruction. This is not my area of expertise, but Elizabeth Hughes, Paul Riccomini, Sarah Powell have all done really great work in this space. And what they have demonstrated is that there are 105 novel math terms by the end of first grade that are typically introduced, and more than 325 novel math terms by the end of 5th grade. And they suggested that teaching language that is mathematically correct can help children generalize across concepts. So it helps build acquisition, and then fluency, and then generalization as students move across different concepts and skills. And it is necessary for understanding math in oral and written terms. So what they would argue is that we're going to say this and not that. We're going to say, let's start counting with 1 instead of 1 is the first number, 324 instead of 324, compose or decompose instead of make or break apart, greater than or less than instead of bigger or smaller, regroup instead of borrow. I think we're all good on that one. Numerator and denominator instead of top number and bottom number, equivalent fraction in the simplest form instead of reduce, 5 4/10 instead of 5.4, cube has 6 faces instead of 6 sides, and transformations are referred to as reflection, translation, and rotation instead of flips, sides, and turns. So what I really like is this idea that we're going to actually have a comprehensive conversation about our vocabulary. We're going to pre-teach key vocabulary terms from the unit or lesson, again, providing a more explicit experience for students. We're going to use simple and direct language. We're going to illustrate with a visual or a picture, and we're going to provide examples and non-examples. So you can imagine different classroom activities that you can do engaging with that vocabulary in a really interactive way. Yeah, and so Laura mentioned in the chat that Sarah has, Powell has some really good videos on YouTube about math vocabulary, and Project STARE is also great. That's a secondary level kind of content. So if you're looking for things there, the National Center for Intensive Intervention is another place where you can get good content, and a lot of Sarah's work is actually uploaded there. And then of course you can find Sarah and her work directly on their own websites.
Yeah, I went through the National Center of Intervention when I
Yep.
went back into the classroom, was teaching math 2 years ago. I watched her entire, like, the course, that it is a free course on there, and it was great.
Yeah, they have a bunch of modules, a bunch of courses, right? They have a lot of materials that you can download and access. So it isn't just like, it's not just a static site. It is a dynamic site. So I think yeah, like you said, it's a really helpful tool. It is called the National Center for Intensive Intervention, or on Intensive Intervention. Laura's going to send you that link. Okay. So we are moving. We're doing a great job. We are in our last two misconceptions. We are at misconception number 5. I feel like 5 and 6, though, I spent the most time, which may make sense because most of you had 5 and 6 as your misconceptions that you were concerned about. So we know that fluency matters generally in math. The student needs to be able to perform all the skills with accuracy and fluency. Generally in math, we still think of things in terms of accuracy. So how many correct or incorrect, which is really problematic because students will not have the opportunity to master skills or illustrate that they've mastered those skills, which was brought up in your text, and I think previously by Zach Rochelle. So I am going to highlight fact fluency and also fluency in general. So I showed this slide earlier, but this entire thing breaks down without one really important key, and that is math facts. Math facts are declarative knowledge. Your book talks about declarative knowledge. Brian Ponte talks a lot about how math facts are declarative knowledge. I think we want to hold on to that and remember that. This is really a gateway to help students access higher level math content. So the truth is, if students automatically retrieve 3 plus 4, they are more likely to access 30 plus 40, 321 plus 452, 3 nines plus 4 nines. If students are not fluent, they are going to direct more attention and working memory to retrieving the solution, experience greater anxiety for and avoidance of math tasks. And who says that? Well, what I think is fascinating about this particular finding is that it's cognitive scientists, educational psychologists, special educators, and math educators. So there is an interdisciplinary group of researchers and experts who have indicated that this is the case, right? So we know that this is really important and true. So what is exactly fact fluency? How do we want to think about it? It is fast and accurate performance. We often think of it on one-digit problems or single-digit problems, otherwise called basic facts, across all whole number operations. All of the number operations should be mastered by the end of 5th grade. It's still surprising to me, although I guess it shouldn't be, because when I've entered a lot of schools in the last decade or more, actually, there isn't a lot of space for fluency building, and facts are not something that's part of the repertoire. I think it's assumed that that's going to happen at home. It doesn't happen in the context of school typically. So so I'm not so surprised, I guess I should say, that when you take the temperature of students at the end of 5th grade, often they don't have all 4 operations mastered. And that is going to be substantially problematic for when students enter secondary level schooling, starting with middle school and 6th grade. Why is this so important? Well, it's associated with higher mathematics achievement and more efficient processing on complex tasks. We know that automatic retrieval of basic facts has been associated with higher level math performance for many different studies that have looked at different time points along the way. So it is one of the most important underlying factors. One of my favorite things is that we actually have replication studies illustrating how important calculation fluency is, and calculation accuracy. So we have some data that show that both accuracy and fluency independently contribute to future success with word problem solving, pre-algebraic skills, and fraction knowledge. We also know that it's not just true for basic facts, but also for complex number combinations. So studies have illustrated this is the case with addition, multiplication and division facts, but also with long division and 3 by 1 digit multiplication. So you need to be accurate and fluent in both of those in order to successfully proceed with word problem solving, pre-algebraic skills, and engage in fraction knowledge. I think it's really important to think about this pathway to automaticity. We talked already, and you illustrated the strategy that you were most efficient with when presented with a complex whole number computation problem. This is what the classic sort of pathway from counting to mental retrieval. And the goal is always to get to that most efficient strategy. So with basic facts, it's mental retrieval. Students may start out as counting all. So if you ask them, what's 3 plus 5? They're going to hold up all their fingers, right? And start with 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is not very efficient. Then they're going to start from the first addend. So if they're presented with the problem 3 plus 5, they might start with 3 and then say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What we want them to do is strategic counting, which is counting from the larger addend. So starting with 5 and then saying 6, 7, 8, obviously much, much quicker. So we can think about that as strategic counting. We also might think about decomposition as mathematics reasoning. So being able to compose 7 plus 8 into these other elements. Of course, the challenge with decomposition is that you have to have these declarative facts in order to really use that decomposition piece. So the link between strategic counting and mental retrieval is we have more evidence for than we do for decomposition to mental retrieval. The other thing I would say is I have worked with students entering school, kindergartners, who have automatic retrieval of basic facts in addition, sometimes in multiplication, and we don't want to make those students go backwards. They already know this, so we're good to keep moving them forward. And I think sometimes that happens in schools. So that is fact fluency facts. So now let's talk a little bit more about that practice with procedures. So I like to think about practice. You've talked about retrieval practice. I refer to it as opportunities to practice. It's the same notion. We know that deliberative and productive opportunities to practice are required for all types of learning. We accept it for sports and music, so why not math? They promote active engagement with math content. Again, we've already heard, your guests have already talked about some really active ways to promote practice opportunities. We want to be providing high levels of feedback and support, and we also want to engage in timed practice activities to promote fluency. The experts have long said that 70% of instructional time should be allocated to practice activities. I believe when Zach Rochelle was on, he referred to 90% of your lesson should be review and practice together with 10% of new knowledge. So that's, I think, something, again, to strive to. It also suggests when we are talking about students that need intervention support that 10 minutes of daily fluency practice is required for those students in the area of math. And that's from one of those practice guides that I was referring to earlier from the What Works Clearinghouse, or the Institute for Education Sciences. When I think about productive practice, one of the things that's really interesting to me, and this is the work by Matthew Burns, we vastly underestimate how much practice is needed for students to master skills and concepts. What they showed, and this was just an example study looking just at simple multiplication facts, so basic multiplication facts, and they demonstrated that on average, a third grader requires 7 to 8 repetitions in order to master one single fact, and a fourth grader requires 5 repetitions. So as you go up in grade, the number of repetitions goes down. And of course, if you are a below average third grader, you're going to require more like 11 repetitions, and a below average fourth grader is going to require about 6 repetitions. So we underestimate what's needed. In addition, we need to make it deliberate. So it needs to match, the materials need to match the student's instructional level. So again, thinking about the instructional hierarchy, where is the student? Sequence that practice into small sets. Because we're sequencing it into small sets, we're going to alter those small sets according to student progress, which we need to log. And then we're going to integrate all of those small sets together for cumulative review. So I really like to rethink practice and talk about it in 3 different ways. Guided practice, which is establishing the skills. So this might sound familiar, right? It's that acquisition stage. It's often teacher-led. It's about accuracy building. It includes demonstration and modeling, those think alouds that we were talking about, and worked and partially worked examples. So hopefully this is another answer to that question that was raised earlier about what to do when a student doesn't really understand that standard algorithm. Timed practice is about retaining and maintaining. That's that fluency stage of the instructional hierarchy. It can be student-led. You can use flashcards and worksheets and peer-mediated or team-based activities. You can also employ technology. And then cumulative review, which has been talked about by all your guests and in your book, is that enduring and applying, generalization and adaptation, those latter 2 stages of the instructional hierarchy. It's about integrating previously learned skills and concepts. So using things like math games, challenge problems, and interleaved practice really works here. One cautionary tale that I see often is that schools will use games, and particularly computer-based games, to build fluency. Computer-based games do not build fluency. They are good for generalization and adaptation, but timed practice is really the best thing for fluency building. I'm going to actually skip this slide, but you will have this on your resources, just looking at our time here, because I want to get to this last one. I know a lot of people wrote that number 6 was like the main thing that they have faced in this educational situation. Oh, and I think there's there's no questions, but there is those links that you were asking for, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no questions. It was just putting the links in, so you're good.
Awesome. Thank you. So I wanted to get to this last one, time tests cause math anxiety. And I want to first say, why do we assess with timed tests? And I think this can be sometimes a source of confusion. So rate-based assessments have better psychometric properties and can identify the difference between the students that are in the instructional mastery or frustration levels of performance, which we like to line up with that instructional hierarchy to match their skills. And accuracy has an upper limit that misses whether students have mastered learning. So really, rate-based tests provide superior information in knowing whether students have attained mastery. They're efficient and they waste less instructional time, and they tend to be more reliable and valid than accuracy measures. Timed tasks are also effective for promoting fluency in math. Again, on that What Works Clearinghouse guide that was referred to in your book, that assisting students struggling with mathematics, it's listed as having strong evidence for building fluency. So we're going to talk about what math anxiety is, and then I'm going to tie it all together for you. So we know what timed tests are used for. We know why timed tasks are important. So what is math anxiety? Math anxiety refers to feelings of apprehension, tension, or fear that interfere with performance on math-related tasks. Math anxiety can make it difficult to solve math problems in the classroom and in real-world situations like planning a budget, calculating a tip. Its implications are that students are less likely to take advanced math courses in high school or make STEM career choices, which can have an economic disadvantage to students. So what we want students to be able to do is make their choices, but not in the context of being afraid of math. We also know that there's a relationship between math achievement and math anxiety. So there's been 5 different meta-analyses, a lot of them very recent, suggesting that there's a small to moderate negative relationship, meaning that as math anxiety goes up, achievement goes down. The relationship seems to be consistent across the lifespan, racially and ethnically diverse samples within the United States, and it does not depend on content of origin. We also see it in children as young as age 6. What's important, though, is in these studies about the relationship between math achievement and math anxiety, the magnitude of this relationship is stronger for complex computation or advanced math tasks with multiple steps, as opposed to basic math skills, which is sometimes confused, and math measures that impact student grades. We also know that math anxiety is impacted by student perceptions of the teacher quality of math instruction and teacher confidence in teaching math, as well as the average student's math anxiety at the classroom or school level. So these results suggest that the nature of the instructional task, as well as the instructional quality and teacher affect, can be related to student math anxiety. We took a deeper dive into that because we were looking into timed task studies to see if there were studies to demonstrate whether or not time tasks cause math anxiety. In this study, we used two tasks, a simple math and a complex math task. You see them in front of you here. One is simple multiplication, the other is multi-digit addition. And then we had an overt timing task. So you could think of all of the bells and whistles, and then a covert timing task. So no time limit was provided to the students. There was no noise. The time was kept out of sight, but we kept that time consistent to make sure we controlled timing. And here's what we found. There were no differences in math performance or math anxiety between those two timed tasks, whether it was overtly timed or covertly timed. Students reported higher math anxiety when completing complex problems. Students that already entered our study with high math anxiety reported higher math anxiety when completing complex problems where they were unaware of the timing. And students with math difficulties and those with already existing high math anxiety perceived those difficult tasks that were covertly timed as harder. So, task complexity resulted in higher math anxiety. Complex but not timed tasks produced more math anxiety. And then kids without math anxiety did better on complex tasks when overt timing was included. And we've actually seen this before. There was one prior study by Grays and colleagues. You can see here that the students with high math anxiety performed worse overall than students with lower moderate math anxiety. So that's what this graph shows, groupings by low, moderate, and high math anxiety. And then the colored bars represent the conditions: baseline, covert timing, and explicit timing. And you can see that dark gray bar with the arrow above it is higher. All students did better in the explicit timing condition. Okay. We also have been able to show in a meta-analysis that we did that if you actually engage in math skill building, you will get, of course, a moderate to large effect size on math outcomes, and you'll get a small reduction in math anxiety. So I think that's another important thing to think about. So going back to this question, do timed tests cause math anxiety? No, the existing data do not support this myth. When students are given difficult tasks without adequate prior instruction or practice, they might report higher math anxiety. Overt timing on practice tasks can facilitate math performance. Addressing students' math skill gaps directly is useful. And if we start with that first, you could layer additional supports that are therapeutic if needed. So I am going to pause there. Laura, is there a question?
A question for the end. So
Okay.
if you have more, you can keep going, but then we can ask it after.
All right. I think I wanted to round that right out for you guys, so I'm happy to answer that question.
Okay. I have a question first, just about what you just finished up. So you're saying if we only have so many instructional minutes and intervention minutes,
Yep.
we are better than to address the math skills first?
You betcha. Yep.
Because I know in every school, we only have so many minutes in a day. So by addressing those math skills first, we can support the math anxiety at the same time.
You got it. Yep.
So Mike had a question. Which of the 6 misconceptions, sorry, I just went up on me. Which of the 6 misconceptions do you think has the most significant negative impact on student achievement?
Oh my goodness, you're gonna make me rank order these. Well, we can't do anything without math fact fluency. So I think that might be the biggest one for me. And then the next one is the conceptual first piece, if we are also pairing that with productive struggle and not using explicit instruction. So I guess that's not fair. I cheated. Okay, explicit instruction and math facts. Those are the 2 most important things, I think.
And someone asked if the slides would be available, like if we could post them with our
you can post them.
recording.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. We'll post them with our recording when the tech people get to that part this week.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions? I'm seeing lots of thank yous starting. Okay, well, it is 8:15, so I'll just take back over here and we can finish up. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Dr. Codding. That was so informative. Even though through ONlit, we focus on the Ontario language curriculum, many of our educators here tonight will also be teaching math. Your expertise will help all of us make more evidence-informed decisions about mathematics instruction. Now let's return back to our evidence-informed educator series. Remember, these visuals are designed to be a launching point to get learning started. Share one with a colleague, recommend the book and the recordings of this book study, and encourage others to learn about evidence-informed practices. So first, we have definitions of conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, and then a quote in the middle about that bidirectional relationship that Dr. Codding was discussing earlier. A few quotes about worked examples on how they can support instruction and cognitive load. Dr. Swain's definition of high and low variance schools. And a few influential quotes about knowledge. Remember, these visuals are designed to be a launching point to get learning started. They do not include everything, but they could help you get the conversation started about evidence-informed practices in your school community. So now let's wrap up our session and plan our next steps. Our fifth session will be on Thursday, March 27th, 7:15 to 8:15 Eastern Standard Time. Note that with the March break, there is an extra week between now and our next session. We'll be covering Chapter 10 on implementation. Our Informed Insights guest will be Scott Hill. Mr. Hill is the superintendent of Evergreen School District. He and his team were awarded the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Award for their dedication to professional development, supporting teachers in implementing evidence-based practices, and providing impactful interventions. We will discuss the 4E implementation model and his journey with implementation and pursuing sustainable system-wide change. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I look forward to seeing you all again on March 27th. Let's bring joy to our students by harnessing the science of learning together.